To give a brief visual description of myself, I am a white woman in her 30s with glasses and dark brown hair, and I'm sitting in front of a wall with a work of art and a plant behind me. So let's get started. Today's session, I will do my best to follow it. If you were at the last session, you know I went over a bit, but I'm not going to today. I've been practicing and I'll keep it short and sweet, but we'll have about an hour to dive deep into virtual programming. We'll have a 10-minute break because I'm sure inevitably we're all getting zoomed out today. And then we will have about 15 minutes with our guest, Lindsay Drexler, who will speak about her own experiences as a user of captioning. And then we'll have about 30 minutes reserved for questions and answers. So I hope that you have lots of questions. As you think of them, like Clover said, please feel free to use the Q&A function as well. Some notes for today. This session is a safe space, and that really means that you should feel free to ask a question as long as it's coming from a place of respect. Don't worry if it's a silly question or you think it's really obvious and you should know the answer. We're all learning and we're not here to judge you. We all were beginners at one point and we're in this together. Please, again, use the Q&A for questions related to content. And if you need any technical support, feel free to use the chat feature and Clover will be looking at that and helping you if you need it. We do have a live captioner and American Sign Language interpretation. Hopefully you can see both right now. If you can't, I think you should be able to press the CC button at the bottom and you should see the captions. And I believe the interpreter should just appear for you on the screen. But if you're having any issues related to that, please let Clover know in the chat. And I really encourage you, even if you don't need these services to communicate, that you're using them and seeing how they work, because that's one of the ways that you're going to learn how all of this different technology can benefit different people once you see it in action. So keep the closed captions up when you're watching TV or when you're watching the session, and I think you're going to learn a lot about captioning in and of itself. We will be sharing this PowerPoint and a bunch of resources with you afterwards, as well as this recording. So that is to say, if you need to take a break, I will not be offended. So please stretch, please turn off your screen, do what you got to do to get through life in the pandemic. And then finally, this is a huge topic. It's normal to be overwhelmed. And so like anything, we're going to break it down into manageable pieces and try to simplify it where we can. But it's normal to be overwhelmed. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. We're going to do this together. A little bit about CCAC, which is a great resource for you today. And Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium is completely run by volunteers. We're a nonprofit, and our mission is really simple. We want to empower cultural spaces, you, to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. So we're doing that with professional development workshops, free accessible equipment loans, and an access calendar that lists accessible events happening in the Chicago region. So those are some of the ways that we want to help support you in your journey as you figure out how to become more accessible. You are welcome to email me. My email address is cgunther, Gunther, @chicagoculturalaccess.org. So you can join our listserv, get involved, ask questions. I keep saying you're not alone because you're really not. And I've started this work by myself feeling like I was the only one thinking about this, and I'm certainly not alone. There's lots of people figuring this out, and sharing resources is the only way you're going to figure it out for yourself. We have a lot of great resources on CCAC's website, which is chicagoculturalaccess.org. So I encourage you to take a look at that as well. Before I begin any presentation that's related to disability, I am legally obligated by my brother to share photos of my brother. This is Travis. He is my younger brother. He's 33. And I'm sharing 2 photos of him in museums. Travis has Down syndrome, and he and I love to go to museums and theater together. So I chose today 2 photos from museums to share with you. One on the left is a photo of Travis at the Art Institute, standing in front of a small Andy Warhol painting where Andy Warhol's staring at the viewer kind of defiantly with his chin raised, and Travis is copying that posture as well. And then on the right is from the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, Florida. And Travis is standing in front of a military portrait of, looks like an English officer from the 18th century. And he's standing very rigidly, sort of like a soldier himself, but he has a huge grin on his face. So Travis wants me to say hi to you and also wants me to help him get famous. So this is the only way that I know how to do that. But Travis is really the inspiration for me getting involved in disability work, and especially understanding the intersection of where arts and disability meet and how important it is to make our spaces accessible to everybody. So now that I've got all of that housekeeping out of the way, we're going to do a quick refresher. Maybe you remember this if you were here before, but if you're not, I think it's worthwhile to really discuss a little bit more about what disability means. We won't go into as great of detail as we did before, but this is a helpful place for us to get started. So the first definition of disability that we'll look at is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. So the ADA is a civil rights law in America that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. And it's really our main disability law that we have here in the States. And so the definition of disability here is someone who has a record of or is regarded as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And major life activities are defined as eating, breathing, walking, talking, seeing, etc. So the point is, it's a huge category, and it's covering all different types of disabilities and a lot of chronic medical conditions as well. And what I also find interesting is it's not even if you have a disability, but if you are regarded as having a disability. So if you even look like you might have a disability, you're still covered under the ADA. So this is a huge category of people. There's a definition that I prefer us to talk about, which I think is especially pertinent for us in arts organizations, which is the World Health Organization's definition. And they are defining disability as a contextual variable, dynamic over time, and in relation to circumstances. Basically, one is more or less disabled based on the interaction between the individual or between the person and the individual, institutional, and social environments. So it's basically saying, depends on the circumstance. If you see a flight of stairs and you're a wheelchair user, you're gonna have a huge barrier in order to get to where you need to go. If you don't have stairs and everything is accessible, then you're a lot less disabled in that case. This is really inspired by the social model of disability. So let's go a little further into what the social model is. The social model of disability is saying that a person is disabled by society's barriers. So it is really turning on its head the way that traditionally disability was considered as an individual person's problem. Instead, it's saying it's a societal problem and it's something we need to change. So it's putting responsibility on government, on organizations, on businesses, on other power structures to identify and implement constructive changes to remove barriers and increase access. So they're saying disability is a systemic issue. So just as we're talking a lot right now about racism and how that is systemic to so many different organizations and positions of power, same with disability. So the cool thing about the social model is that it was developed by disabled people to allow for full access and their full participation in all parts of society. And it's also incredibly empowering because we're not saying, hey, you figure out how to get what you need to get. We're saying, how do we change as organizations? And all of you here representing an organization, that's on you to figure out ways that you can make sure that everybody can participate and access your services and what you're providing for other people. The prevalence of disability is also something really important for us to talk about, and I think is a statistic that's helpful to have at the ready if you have a higher up in your organization who's saying, we don't really have disabled people that come to our organization. This isn't really an issue for us. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans has some type of disability. So nearly 25% of all people. And remember, disability is a huge category, but that's 25% of the population. And we also know that as we get older, we're more likely to develop a disability. So I think we all know, or maybe for ourselves, or we know a loved one who as they age are having difficulties getting around. So having some sort of mobility disability, losing their hearing, having difficulty seeing, maybe they've developed macular degeneration. And then also cognitively, we know that you could get dementia or other types of memory loss. So that's a huge percentage of also disabled people is older people. And for arts organizations, we know that our membership base, typically for most arts organizations is older people. So we know there's probably even more than 25% of your members are going to have some type of disability. Whether or not they identify with being disabled and having a disability is another topic, but certainly they would likely fall in the category of having a disability. We also know that anyone may join the disability community at any time, temporarily or permanently. Right now, I do have a temporary disability. I think I mentioned the last time I spoke, but I am recovering from a concussion and I have post-concussion syndrome. So I do have a disability and that affects me at work because it's hard for me to be on a screen for 8 hours a day. So that is expected to change, but I do have a disability right now. And so similarly, thinking about if you have a broken foot or if you are recovering from some sort of surgery, or even being pregnant sometimes can be categorized as a disability if it affects you in a medical sense and you're having issues that would impact you, say at work or at school. And then there's also permanent disabilities. So thinking about emergencies or different medical conditions like multiple sclerosis that could develop later in your life. So there's lots of different ways that people can become disabled temporarily or forever. There was a quote that I shared before, but I'll share it again because it's so good, which is the difference between a person with a disability and a person without a disability is 5 seconds. Disability is a very fluid category. And then finally, and I think this is also really important, especially for the higher ups that are saying, I don't see any disabled people in the audience, as you just look and you can just guess, many disabilities are invisible. So we really have to take people at their word. If they're saying that they have a disability, there's often no way that we can check, and legally we can't check. So we have to really take people at their word as well. But we do know so many disabilities are invisible. So just to drive the point home, disabilities affecting people of all ages, races, ethnicities, gender identities, socioeconomic statuses, zip codes, and also to say disability is a normal part of the human experience. Sometimes I think we're brought up to think that disability is special, that it just happens to a small percentage of people, but we know it's happening to 1 in 4 people, and it's going to happen to many, many different types of people. So it behooves all of us to realize that disability is just a part of life, and that's okay. So now that we've done our refresher, let's dive deep into accessibility in virtual programs. And I've been trying not to get distracted by the chat, but I see that that there has been some chat about getting the ASL interpreters visible. So we're seeing accessible virtual programs in action. Hopefully all of you can see the interpreter and the captions now, but if not, again, feel free to use the chat. So something that is important before we go further in talking about virtual programs is to talk a little bit about effective communication. Effective communication is a key legal concept from the ADA, and it's really at play for a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about virtual programming. So effective communication is basically saying that cultural organizations must make it possible for individuals with speech, hearing, and vision disabilities to be able to understand what is conveyed and can communicate effectively. The goal here is to ensure that communication for people with disabilities is as effective as communication with people without disabilities. We must provide auxiliary aids or services in the individual's normal methods of receiving communication when providing services. So for instance, if somebody is deaf and they choose to communicate in sign language, they would request sign language interpretation. We need to do our best to provide sign language interpretation because that is their normal method of receiving communication. So that is a really helpful concept that I would encourage you, especially if you're getting any pushback from anyone in your organization, to turn to say, hey, we actually need to do this, because a lot of the interpretation, audio description, a lot of these different pieces are effective communication. So we're going to look now at visual access. So thinking about how our programs online can be accessible for people who are blind or have low vision. I'm going to share a quick video with you. It does have captions and that work pretty well. So here we go.
Just watch a movie and close your eyes, and you can't follow most movies with just listening. Be like, who's that? What's going on?
Police lights flash on the front of the Byers house as Officer Callahan stands outside with Joyce and Jonathan.
Audio description is a description of the action that's going on in between the dialogue.
Inside the dark house, Hopper walks down the hallway with a flashlight.
For blind people, having that audio description, it becomes their eyes.
I definitely say Orange is the New Black, Stranger Things and Game of Thrones have been my audio description highlights.
11 closes her eyes. Elsewhere in the lab, the man from the photo sits at a table with a piece of paper.
I can't see anything at all. So actually, I've never had audio description on life, as it were. So having it on TV is a great start.
I use it for watching TV programs, for films at home, films in the cinema.
Theatre and cinema are my favourites.
I use audio description when I go to football matches.
A lot of those little subtleties in the way a person looks or something they do with their hands is actually a massive part of the story.
11 steps out wearing the dress and wig. Lucas gives Dustin an impressed look as Mike gawks at her.
If it's a gentle film, they'll have perhaps a gentler voice.
Blinks, tilting his head.
And in the action films, they'll have a harder edge description.
It drags dried growth and a piece of shepherd's suit across the floor, leaving behind a trail of blood.
All that tension, a lot of that is based in seeing what's happening and getting a sense of the atmosphere, and that's really brought to life as well by audio description.
I don't watch anything without audio description.
I'm an absolute addict of audio description. I OD on AD.
For more info.
All right, so that is a really helpful video, I think, to introduce what audio description is. And you got to see some of that in action with the Stranger Things TV show. So audio description is providing additional narration that describes key visual components and unspoken action of a piece of visual media or live performance. It really depends how you are live streaming your performances, but when we're thinking specifically about performances and thinking about blind people and how to make it accessible, audio description is the main method that we're going to make whatever we're presenting accessible for them. And you can imagine, I think they did a great job on that video of showing, like, if you can't see, you're really missing a lot of important information. And that is certainly true for a lot of the performances that are live streamed, where there's dialogue and different pieces, but there's other visual action that's happening. So for these performances, audio describers will really help tell you how they can provide audio descriptions for you depending on what platform you're using. So there's different options to do that. One way that I included on the slide was to produce 2 different streams. So you can have one with the open audio description and one without. And you just want to make it clear to guests in advance that if you need to use audio description, this is the link that you're going to use and you're going to access it that way. It's one way that people have been able to make their events online accessible for people who are blind. I've also included an image on the top right, which is the universal symbol of audio description, which is AD, the initials for audio description. And then 3 looks kind of like the right side of a parentheses. That's signifying sound because you're describing using sound what's happening visually. There also are ways that you can make your talk. So if we're not thinking about a performance or thinking about a talk or some sort of presentation like today accessible, you could provide audio description for virtual presentations. And I've seen it done even where the blind person would call in using a telephone and talk like on their cell phone. And the audio describer would also be watching and they would be describing to that person on the phone. That would be kind of a low tech way to do it, but there's also other ways to do it using separate channels. I would guess for most of you, when you're doing a talk or when you're having a meeting, probably what would be sufficient would be to make sure that you're requesting that all speakers and presenters are describing the visual information that they're sharing. So you saw at the top of the program, I described myself visually, what I look like, and I'm also introducing my pronouns. So just as we've normalized introducing your pronouns when you introduce yourself, you can also describe yourself, which is helpful for people who are joining by phone or people who are blind. And then we want to most importantly make sure that we're describing all visual information presented. So you'll see on the talk today, every word, for the most part, that's on the slides that I'm sharing, I am saying orally as well. So I'm making sure that I'm not saying, oh, you can read for yourself. There's a lot of text here. You can read it. Or if I'm sharing a chart or a graph, I want to make sure that I'm explaining what it's showing and not just saying like, as you can see here, and not really explaining what it means. You'll also notice that when I shared the pictures of Travis, my brother, that I was describing what he looked like and the significance of the photos and why I was sharing them. So if we normalize telling our speakers this before they start an event for us, this will just become part of what we do. And it's very easy to describe. There's some simple handouts that will be included in what I share of kind of giving you some basics about how to use description and how you can just really straightforwardly describe things that you're sharing. I think it's helpful sometimes to just imagine that you are speaking on the radio or something. So just like when I listen to NPR every morning, they're describing things that I can't see. So similarly, you need to be describing things that some people may not be able to see. So that would be a pretty low tech option for talks, to just make sure that you're describing it that way. But if I was an art museum sharing a lot of images that would be really hard to describe in great detail, then maybe I would want to hire an audio describer for that event, for instance. Then let's look a little bit more at other things that we would want to request for all speakers to do for presentations and conferences. We really want to encourage our speakers to balance the need to verbalize visual information with the need to keep the text concise. So when we're asking our presenters to say everything that's on a slide or to describe things, it's important to acknowledge that that takes more time. So be aware of that. There's also ways in which you design your slides or what you're presenting to make sure you're using text that is high contrast and in large, legible sans serif font. We're going to avoid italics or specialty flowery fonts. And you also can use an online color contrast checker. And there's a link here in this PowerPoint that you'll receive soon that you can check to see if you have enough contrast in your colors. So I wouldn't have like white on gray, for instance. So I want to make sure it's very, very easy for people who have low vision to be able to read. We also want to make sure that we have other ways for people to access the video conference. So not just sharing a Zoom link, but making sure that we're also including a phone number for people to dial in. And that's helpful for lots of different people. And frankly, is even helpful for me having a concussion, because I don't like to join Zoom unless I can avoid it because it's hard for my head. So offering a phone call in is really, really helpful for lots of different people, including people who are blind. And then you also want to make sure that you are allowing a way for guests to request resources in advance. So I have a friend who has low vision, and she likes to reach out to different organizers before events to request the slide deck in advance, because she wants to enlarge it. She has an iPad, she enlarges everything really, really big. So that way, while she's participating in the Zoom talk, she's able to follow along and understand what's being shared that way, because that is how she prefers to receive information. So making sure we have a way for guests to communicate requests for us. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now I have another example of audio description in virtual talks that I'm going to share from a CCAC event. This also has captions.
White text over video of past events. Logo, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. Professional Development Series presents What Can a Body Do? Access Book Club with Sarah Hendren. As the program begins, a woman speaks directly to us. A note that while the program mentions ASL interpreters being available, they are not present on this recording.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Cosner and I am one of the 3 co-chairs for the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. And I wanted to thank you all for coming today and welcome Sarah Hendren, who is the author of What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World. Before we get started, I'd like to give a visual description of myself for any attendees who can't see me. I am a 30-something white woman with shoulder-length, curly brown hair. Behind me is a white background with the CCAC logo in the upper corner. I'd also like to note that I do use she and her pronouns.
White text over video of past events.
Okay. So I wanted to show that as an example of what you can do, first of all, for audio description for talks. So we have an audio describer that's on this recorded video. So that was the woman's voice you heard describe the CCAC logo, let everyone know that they're mentioned ASL interpreters, but they're not present, all of that. So that's a way that you can add audio description to videos that you post. You can do it that way. Also, just be aware that when you are adding text at the beginning of a recording, so for instance, if you've done a Zoom recording from a meeting or event that you put on and you're just going to put it on YouTube, and you're adding the title and maybe your logo, if you're just using those visuals and not using any words, that's lost information for people who are blind. So you want to make sure that you're including audio with text. So having a recording of someone saying your logo or saying the title of the event, because those are 2 really important things that you'd want people to know, is really good to do. So consider adding audio description after the fact. So if you weren't able to provide audio description for the actual event, but you plan to make it a recording and you expect it to be kind of popular, or even if you don't, but if you expect it to be popular, definitely try to get audio description added to the video after the fact. You could do it yourself, or you could also hire an audio describer to do it for your video. Something to note that if you are trying to post a video and add audio description, it's not as straightforward as it is with captions. So the majority of video platforms don't natively support separate audio description files. So that's a complicated way of saying, basically, if you're on YouTube, there's the CC button at the bottom right where you can press that and turn on captions. There isn't an equivalent of that for audio description on those platforms yet. I bet there will be soon, but for the time being, you have to kind of be creative in how you would want to present your audio description. So there's a couple different ways you could do that. The way that CCAC has chosen to do it, because we want to be a model of accessibility and we want people to understand what audio description is, and we think we want to normalize access services in general, that we're using the audio description version of the video as the primary video. So we don't have another video that doesn't have audio description. You also could create one video with audio description and one video without, and make that clear in the titles. Or there's also third-party plugins that you could purchase if you wanted to add sort of that closed captioning element for audio description. And in this PowerPoint, there's a link for some more information about how to add audio description to your events and posted videos. So that was a lot about kind of Zooming or YouTubing, but some other important ways that you can make digital information accessible for people who are blind or low vision is to be aware of screen readers and make sure that what you're providing is accessible for screen readers. So screen readers are the way that blind people and people with low vision use their computers. So they're not able to see, they're not able to use the mouse. And so they have special technology that is basically reading everything to them that's on the screen. So you want to make sure that whatever you're sharing, whether it's an e-blast or your website or even a Word document or a PowerPoint, that whatever you're sharing is going to be accessible for people who use screen readers. So one of the really easy ways that you can do that is to use alt text. So alt text stands for alternative text. And basically that is describing really succinctly what the image you're sharing is about. So I'm going to try to show you here if I can. So I stopped right now the presentation mode for my PowerPoint, and I have an image here that says check accessibility, which is a screenshot from Microsoft products of how you can check if something is accessible. And if I right click on this, I'm choosing edit alt text, and hopefully you can see on my screen that you can see the alt text. So I have put this in. So the detail of what this image that I'm sharing is it's a screen grab of check accessibility logo from Microsoft Suite products. It's an image of a piece of paper with a blue circle over it. So that is a really easy way that on Microsoft, but certainly on lots of other platforms, that you're able to describe what the image is that you're sharing. And this technology is also available. Let's see, I have to close out of this. This technology is also available on Facebook, on Instagram, on lots of social media platforms. So you should be doing this very easily for everything that you're sharing, and certainly for your e-blasts and emails that you're sharing with folks. So now I'm trying to go back into presentation mode. There we go. So also make sure that if you have any graphics that include text, so for instance, I know for like big theatrical productions or big exhibitions, sometimes we have a graphic designer that might design a logo for the event. So it will have words and an image and will be really, really pretty and attractive. And that's great to do that, but beware that if you're not using alt text, a blind person is going to totally miss what that is completely. But also if it's really important information, make sure you're just including the text underneath the image, for instance. So if it's like big event, our big gala, then you would have in text, our big event, our big gala. So it'd be really clear for people who are using screen readers what you're sharing. Like I mentioned, the check accessibility feature in Microsoft, this is just a screen grab from the PowerPoint that I was making. And I was able to check that and see that I was missing alt text on some of the images I was sharing. It's also going to remind you that you should use like the templates that come with PowerPoint, for instance, because you'll notice on a lot of PowerPoint templates, they'll have the title, and it will say like the font name and title, and then it will have the font name and body. And that is really helpful information for a screen reader, because they're going to know title, that's the important stuff, and body, that's the meat. So it's going to kind of prioritize, it creates a hierarchy of what's important when it comes to the information. Another way that you can help be accessible is to use descriptive links. So I see on so many different organizations that they use sort of the click here approach. So you're making the link the words click here. And that actually is incredibly unhelpful for somebody who uses a screen reader, because like I said, screen readers are prioritizing information, and they actually bundle together all of the links that might appear on a website or in an email. And so they're going to bundle it all together. So those click here's are going to be meaningless because they're out of context. So you're going to want to make sure that you're describing what the links are. So I use the example of buy tickets for this show, or like read the accessibility guidelines, and you would have all of that underlined. So that would be really helpful for a screen reader. And then also, when we use hashtags or when we use links or even email addresses, if we have multiple words that we scrunch together without spaces and that are not capitalized, the screen reader is going to read it all as one clump of information. They're not going to read it as separate words. So the example I used here was just do it. So if that was hashtag just do it, typically you see hashtags are not capitalized. So it would just read it really quickly, just do it, or in a way that was really unhelpful for somebody who's blind. And so I showed an example of just do it. So you're capitalizing the J, the D, and the I. And then you also want to make sure that your website is accessible to screen readers. That's usually a bigger conversation because that's not always things we can control. If in the roles that I've ever had in an organization, that's not anything I've been able to control, at least. But you can check and see how accessible your websites are, and you can help prioritize accessibility perhaps in the coming years to make your website more accessible. But certainly these options that I mentioned before are all really simple fixes that nearly anybody could do for the collateral material you're creating. So let's talk now about hearing access and talk a little bit about how we can make to make our events more accessible for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So you're seeing two of the ways that you can help make your live streamed events more accessible. So I don't need to show you a video because you're actually seeing it in person. So you see that we have ASL interpretation, and we also have captioning happening. So those are two really key ways that we're going to make content accessible for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. We also want to make sure that, especially if I've seen like a gallery talk in a small art center where it was really echoey and there weren't microphones. So that's really, really hard for somebody who has some hearing but is losing it. So we want to make sure that the videos that we're producing and the audio in the video are of high quality. So it's worth investing in a microphone or getting some of those ring lights, or I have a low-tech light here, but just making sure that it's really easy for people to hear and see you. Because remember, some people who are deaf or hard of hearing might also be relying on lip reading to be able to understand what's happening. So we want to make sure that people can see you very well. We want to make sure we are repeating questions. If we have people from the audience asking questions, the speaker should always repeat the question. That's just helpful in general, but that is really helpful for people with hearing loss. We want to make sure we're avoiding backlighting. Don't want to have a big window behind you, for instance, so that would be harder for people to see your face and to read your lips. So as you saw, we had some hiccups, which is normal to have technical difficulties these days, but we did have some hiccups with the ASL interpreters and making sure that everybody could see them. So you want to make sure you're announcing that you're having these services. So if anybody needs it, they know to ask if it's not working, but also plan ahead and save a little time maybe before the event starts to practice. And if it's a big event, do a dress rehearsal with the interpreters or with the captioners to make sure everything's working smoothly, because we know lots of things can go wrong. And then we also want to make sure that we're sending all materials for the interpreters as well as the captioners. Basically, if you're hiring anybody in advance to come and provide access for you, you want to make sure you're providing them with all the proper nouns and a lot of the technical jargon that you might be sharing, so that way the quality is going to be good. And I've learned the hard way. I shared that video from CCAC where we did not have interpreters on the video, and we actually wanted to for the recording. So what I have learned is be sure to record to the cloud in Zoom on gallery view. And usually that can help you get the interpreter and the speaker. So if you plan to record and share this video later and you want to have the interpreter, that's one way to do it. My recommendation when it comes to American Sign Language interpretation is to provide that for your largest events or for events that you expect deaf people may attend. So for instance, if we have the artist Christine Kim, who is deaf, if she was coming to speak to us and sign to us, I would expect a lot of deaf people would come. So I would definitely plan to have ASL interpretation for that event. But if it's an artist that doesn't really have any ties to the deaf community and it's a small event, I probably would wait and hold off on having ASL interpretation for that event and might wait for a larger event. Like for instance, at Adler, where I work, we have not always provided access services before. So we're talking about for commencement ceremonies to have ASL interpretation, for instance. So that's a big deal. We want to make sure that it's accessible to everyone. So prioritize and think about which of your events are the largest that you might have. And that is also to say, if somebody asks for sign language interpretation, you should provide it. So I just mean if you're planning ahead, you don't need to plan to have ASL interpretation at every single event that you ever provide, because that would be a big expense and might not necessarily benefit the audience. So captioning is a whole other thing to talk about. We did talk about this a bit at the last session, but it's a really important topic when we're talking about virtual programs. And so there is a lot of ways that we can provide automatic captioning, and Zoom has made it a lot easier to actually provide automatic captioning for our meetings. So automatic captioning is also called ASR, which means automatic speech recognition. And so on Zoom, that's called transcripts if you're in a meeting. There's also different websites like rev.com that provide automatic captioning that you might have used. And also Google Meets has been providing this for a while, actually, automatic captioning. But automatic captioning, while it's cheap or might be free, isn't always accurate. And you're gonna really encounter a lot of accuracy issues. So especially that technical vocabulary or jargon. You're going to have acronyms at the university where I work, so many acronyms at a university, and all of those acronyms get butchered with the Zoom transcript option. And then also proper nouns. So if different people's names are going to be misspelled or really misheard, and that can be pretty awkward to watch sometimes. It doesn't do well if there's lots of people speaking at once. It's going to be confused and you're not going to know who's talking, which is really important for the person who's deaf or hard of hearing to understand. It's going to be confused by homonyms that you're sharing. And also it can often be really inaccessible for people that have accents or speech related disabilities. So for instance, I have a really good friend who's deaf who can't rely on automatic captioning for meetings because automatic captions completely misunderstands everything that she says. So she would need to have a live captioner present for that to be accurately recorded. So that's really important for you to understand that it's definitely not perfect. But it is a good option, especially for smaller events or for events where you might not have had a request for captioning, but you want to try to be accessible. So it's better than nothing, but it's not perfect. And really nothing's perfect, but it's not going to be great. So there also is live captioning, or CART, which is communication access real-time translation. So that is what we have right now. Kathy Raycan is currently captioning for this event. And so she is transcribing everything that is being said. And so having a human is always preferable to having a machine in so many ways. But the human's going to need a draft of the presentation in advance, or the script or other materials, so that they can prepare and be as accurate as possible. So my recommendations for captioning, like I said, would be, I would plan as an organization to make it a priority to provide captioning for every event and meeting that you do. That is just a matter of course. You provide captioning for these meetings or for events, because captioning is benefiting a larger range of audience members than ASL interpretation is. That isn't to say that ASL interpretation isn't important, because it is, but if we need to prioritize, which we all do, captioning should be at the top of your list for every single thing that you're putting on. So I suggest using automatic captioning for those smaller meetings, and then live captioning for larger events. So we know that automatic captioning is not perfect, and it is especially apparent for those larger events when maybe you have a special guest, or maybe, you know, it's commencement and it's going to get every single person's name wrong that it's going to be shared. So you're going to want to have live captioning for larger events, and you want to make sure you're being really clear on your event description that you have either automatic captions or live captions, so people know upfront and they can ask for live captions, for instance, if they know that the automatic captions aren't going to cut it for them. So that would be my suggestion. I would also highly encourage you that you post all videos with accurate captions without exception. And this is really a legal point as well, that you should really make sure that you are providing captioning for every posted event. So if you're sharing a Facebook video, if you have a video on your website, if you're sharing things on YouTube or Vimeo, they need to be captioned, and they need to be captioned accurately. YouTube does have ASR captions for content that's posted and public, but those captions similarly have a lot of issues. So there are really simple ways that you or an intern, somebody can go in and can correct the captions. And you can actually really easily correct the captions by seeing the automatic captioning, finding the errors, correcting them yourself. So you don't have to transcribe the entire event, but you can correct it. And a link for that will be included in what I provide. And then I wanted to share this. This is a screen grab of a text. And this is called the Inventory of Apologies. And this was by Joseph Grigley, Grigley. And he is a deaf artist, and he shared this in a arts magazine a couple of months ago. And this is basically his story of him during the pandemic as a deaf person trying to access different events. And he just kept track of every single apology he received from organizations saying, no, sorry, we don't have captions for this event. So I included some of them here that I'll read. So it says, apologies inventory. Joseph, our apologies, as it's a live event and we don't have closed caption capabilities. Unfortunately, no captions for this program, but we hope so for a future event. I apologize that this happened today, and I will ensure this does not happen again. I hope you can join us for the next talk. Unfortunately, this session is not being captioned. I apologize for any difficulty this may cause. Unfortunately, no captioning has been organized for today's panel. And finally, it is a real shame we could not figure out the technology to have the captioning stream from Zoom to YouTube on this new platform we worked on with the developers, though we tried through many tests and it seems not to be working consistently. I wanted to share this with you to really drive home the point that when we're choosing to not be accessible, and it is a choice sometimes, especially now if you're attending this, you know that there are other ways to be accessible. But when we're choosing to not be accessible, that this is having a real impact on people's lives and their access to information and entertainment. And if you think about the pandemic and how isolating this has been for all of us, you can imagine that this is super frustrating for somebody with a disability who has to constantly be asking for things and be told no. So I wanted to drive that point home to you, not to make anyone feel guilty, but to really spur us on to try to make everything that we do as accessible as possible. And we don't have millions and millions of dollars, and that's okay, but there are lots of ways that we can try to make things more accessible. So now we will move on talking about other ways to become more accessible in our virtual programs. So since I don't have a lot of time today, I wanted to just show you some other ways we can make our programming accessible to people with other types of disabilities. I really focused on people who are blind and have low vision, and people who are deaf or hard of hearing, because that's really the core group we want to make sure we're reaching for our virtual programs, but there are lots of other ways to be accessible. So sensory-friendly programming, there are some really cool examples that have been happening at different museums, especially while they've been closed during the pandemic. But sensory-friendly programming is benefiting autistic people, those with sensory processing disorder, and many others. I would say sensory-friendly programming would be benefiting my brother who has Down syndrome. So lots of different types of disabilities. So some ways that you can do that, you might have a specialized program that would just be sensory friendly and make it really clear. So that would be one way to do it. We want to provide a social narrative. We talked about that in the last program, but that would basically be preparing people for what they're going to encounter when they come to the virtual program. So if we were doing a play, for instance, we would share a social narrative in advance that might have photos of all of the different characters from the play and have their name and maybe a sentence or two about them. So that way people could be more prepared and have their expectations set for what they're going to encounter. We also want to make sure we have a visual schedule. I have a screenshot here. This is from a school, but basically a visual schedule of showing the different activities that you're going to be doing throughout the course of the event. So this is school related, so it's very focused on recess or lunch, computers, library, different things like that. But you'll notice that they're including a little icon, and then they're including like a 1 or 2 word description of what that is. So we're trying to make it super clear to people what's going to be happening at the event. We want to also be really clear about timing. I tried to do that at the top of this program to let you know what the focus is going to be today. We want to allow for breaks. And we want to allow for multiple communication methods. So for this event, you are able to use the chat, and we'll also potentially, if you'd like, you could, when we get to the Q&A part, you can possibly unmute yourself and you could ask a question that way too. So want to make sure you're having other ways for people to communicate. And while this is really little kid related with this picture I'm showing, want to make sure we're being age appropriate. So if I was sharing this for a program for adults, I would make sure that they're adults represented and not children, and make sure that I'm not being patronizing, even if I'm simplifying my language, that it's still coming across as that I'm talking to adults. Because my brother would be extremely offended to be treated like a kid. There also are some really great programs that are happening for guests with memory loss and their care partners. I'm sharing a screenshot from a program called Arts and Minds, which is out of New York. But as you can imagine, during the pandemic, many of these programs that typically were done in museum settings have now been moved online on Zoom, and allowing people at home to stay connected. This audience, people with memory loss or Alzheimer's, are desperate for activities and for ways to connect. They allow people to focus on the present moment outside of the medical context. They're celebrating whatever's shared. There are no wrong answers. And it's a shared experience between the person with memory loss and their care partners. So these programs are specifically inviting someone with memory loss to join in with the person that helps take care of them so they can participate together. And the program is targeting both people to really maximize the interaction. So the picture that I'm sharing here is kind of, I think, like a montage of different Zoom screenshots. So we see some smiling faces on Zoom, and then we see different people drawing still lives. It looks like they're doing a still life of apples and corn with watercolor. And it looks like somebody at the bottom is sharing an image that doesn't really look anything like the still life. But again, there's no wrong answers. We're all celebrating what's being made and done. So this is a really powerful program, and one that I know is going to be maintained online even after the pandemic, and is a really cool way to think about how to engage with older audience members that maybe have stopped coming to your institution. So how do we get started doing this work? That is a great question. And that is, I bet, what a lot of your questions are going to be about. So try to anticipate some of what you would want to know, but I'm sure you'll have more questions that you can ask. But where do we get started? These are all my suggestions, but I would, first of all, enable automatic captioning for every meeting and event. So going to train everybody in my organization to learn how to turn on the captions on Zoom. We're going to do it internally. We're going to do it externally. And that is just what we do. I'm going to encourage you to train colleagues and to request that your presenters describe their slides. So if you are sharing a presentation, I want to make sure you're talking to the presenter in advance and making it really clear that you're going to want them to describe their slides, and you can explain to them even over the phone. Doesn't have to take a long time. Just make sure that whatever you're sharing visually, you're also communicating verbally. You're going to want to caption all of your posted videos and not rely on automatic captioning. This is a big one, especially if you look at the backlog. You maybe have posted a lot of stuff and maybe they haven't been captioned previously. Again, this is a great internship project or even a volunteer project to get different people out there to caption your videos. And I know different organizations, especially during this downtime, have been focusing on doing that. For instance, I know the Chicago Humanities Festival has been really working hard to get all of their videos, past videos, captioned so that it's not automatic captioning. I want you to add a statement of welcome to all of your event descriptions and be ready for requests. I'll talk more about that in a minute. I do always get questions of how much does this cost? And that is a really hard question to answer because it depends on what event you're doing, how long it is, and what type of event it is. If it's going to be a play or if it's going to be a presentation like this, they're very different in terms of prep time. So what I suggest that you do is to contact some service providers now before you actually need to get the service, to figure out how much it might cost and to understand how you request it. Because another question that I get from people is like, oh God, I got this request. I don't know who to contact. I don't know what to do. So plan ahead, figure out, how do you request sign language interpretation? What is the process? And call people, get that figured out. So you have that written down and you're ready to go. And I will be sharing contact information for different service providers after this. So you can get started by calling or emailing those folks as well. I would plan to add an access service for a larger event. So not just relying on automatic captioning there, but for these larger events to plan to try to get captioning with a human or have ASL interpretation or audio description. Plan to do that for a large event. Plan it now, even if it's an event for next year, but start planning it. And if you are going to be doing it online, you still are going to want to have a tech rehearsal if it's a big event, because like I said, many things can go wrong. And so you want to make sure that the access services you're providing are seamless. You're going to want to get connected to guests with disabilities. So it's great you're going to be starting to do some of these things, but you also need to know the audience because you don't live or work in a vacuum, and you want to make sure that the access you're providing is of a high quality, is actually worth it. Like if everybody's like, these automatic captions are not good for this event or for this whatever, it's helpful to know that, so that way you can plan ahead and you can ask them about their experiences and start to develop a relationship with them, which is going to pay off in the long run in a lot of different ways. And then another plug for CCAC, because we really are here to connect you with other people doing the same thing as you. So you're not the only one to be planning a virtual event for the first time and want to be providing access services. So you can get connected with other people that have done that as well. We do have a listserv where people ask lots of different questions, and that would be a great one to be like, hey, I'm providing captioning for the first time. Do you have any tips? And lots of people will respond and probably help you figure it out. So again, you're not alone. So here is what a statement of welcome is. And this is my phrase, but I think it's really important because it is signaling to your guests that you want them to be here. So remember the inventory of apologies, where it was pretty clear to Joseph that people did not want him at their events. We want to include on every event description. So maybe we have the synopsis of the event, we say who the speakers are. At the bottom, at kind of boilerplate, we're going to just have the statement of welcome. And what it's going to say is something along the lines of, guests with disabilities are welcome, and that's the header. And then we're saying, you know, our organization is committed to welcoming everyone to this event. We are providing automatic Zoom captions, for instance, or whatever access service you're providing for this event. To request another access service or to learn more, please contact an email address or a phone number with as much advance notice as you can. And it's important that it's both a phone number and an email address, because that is being more accessible. Accessibility often is providing multiple channels for people to get in touch with you or to communicate. And so having a phone number is really helpful. I know a lot of people don't like to put phone numbers for things. You may get other calls, but it's definitely worth it for that older audience member, or for that blind person who's struggling with your website that's not accessible, or for so many other reasons. Having that phone number is really helpful. And you want to make sure that this phone number and this email address are being regularly checked by somebody who knows what's going on. It doesn't mean that you know everything, but you know enough that if someone's asking for an access service, you're not going to say no to them if they're asking for it. You're going to try to figure out if you can provide it. So that would be a huge piece that I think is something we can all go back to our organizations and start doing tomorrow. Another question that I get is from people is, I've received a request and I'm not sure how to respond to it. So my answer to you is, if you ever get a request where someone is asking for something, your default answer should be, let me check and get back to you. So somebody's asking for something you've never done before, you've never heard of before. Your immediate knee-jerk reaction should not be, no, we don't do that. It should be, oh, let me check and I'll get back to you. And then really sincerely check. That could mean talking with colleagues, but if your organization does not have a good track record with accessibility, then what that would mean is to reach out to a place like CCAC, or there's also the Kennedy Center's LEAD conference, and I'll be sharing information about that as well, which is an international group that you can look to, and they also provide an awesome conference when it's not COVID that you can take advantage of, and they are a great resource. And we also have free technical support from the Great Lakes ADA Center. So you can actually call or email them, and they would be able to do some quick research with you, and you can share that with your supervisor to say like, hey, could we do this? We've never done this before. I think this is how we would do it. And you would probably be able to figure it out. We want to make sure that you can get back to the person who's requesting this as fast as possible. Obviously, it might take a day or two, but don't forget about the request. Again, I refer to Joseph Grigley's really powerful inventory of apologies. Don't be that person who has to apologize for not providing accessibility. Try to do your best to provide the request. And then the final question that I get is, do we have to? So basically, what if we receive a request that we can't provide? And chances are very good that actually you can provide the request. So this is where we get into the ADA, and I generally don't like to talk too much about the ADA because we all want to be compliant. I want everyone to follow the law, but I want you to be inclusive and accessible, and to do that sometimes is to go above and beyond what the ADA is saying. But in this case of the do we have to, then we can be a heavy and say, yeah, you probably do. Chances are very good that you have to provide what somebody's asking for. So you need to prove an undue hardship or that it is a fundamental alteration to your program under the ADA. And most organizations, even if you're super, super small, usually can't demonstrate that it's an undue hardship. So that is something to be aware of, and that is where you have Great Lakes ADA Center, different places that you can reach out to check, but it's probably means you have to do it if somebody's asking for it. And again, talk to other people to understand more about what that means. You always want to do your due diligence to provide the request that someone's asking for. So if someone's asking for ASL interpretation last minute, it's the day of the event, someone's asking, you still should try to provide it. It might be hard to find somebody at the last minute, but you can try to provide it. If somebody gives you more lead time, then you probably can provide it. So you want to be aware that you should be trying your best to provide whatever people are asking for. And then a reminder that you cannot charge the guest with a disability the cost of the service. So if a deaf person's asking for interpretation, we can't send the bill for the interpreter to the deaf guest. That seems pretty obvious, but it's helpful to say because I certainly have personally had bosses that have suggested that. So you cannot do that, and that is a law. So that is the do we have to slide, which is probably my least favorite slide. But this is a helpful quote that I hope will help steer you on, which is "The secret of getting ahead is getting started" by Sally Berger. So I know this all feels like a lot and you're not sure exactly where to get going, but I would just say, just start doing something and then keep adding to it, because it's really easy to be like, we're not accessible. I don't know if I understand everything. Nobody understands everything. We just need to start, and then things will become more apparent as you keep going on. And again, working together, sharing resources, that makes all of this a lot easier. I also want to do a shout out. We have a program for CCAC that's actually this Thursday, April 22nd, that's adapting and advancing cultural accessibility during the pandemic and beyond. So you're going to hear from lots of different organizations that have done really cool things during the pandemic. So a lot of cool virtual programs, and also looking ahead to the future, how we see our new normal as we go back to doing some things in person and then some things online. So there's a link for that in this PowerPoint that I'll be sharing, so you can register more and find out more about it. So thank you very much for your time. You again can email me, cgunther@chicagoculturalaccess.org. So we're going to take a brief break. We're going to, let's come back at 4:20. It's 4:10 right now, so you can take a 10-minute break. All right, it is 4:20. It's time to come back. Hope you had a good break. I got some LaCroix, which was great. So now I'm really excited that I will take a break from talking and I will pass the microphone over to Lindsay Drexler. Lindsay is a good friend and she, her pronouns are she, her. She is a digital strategist and a lifelong Chicagoan. She has been deaf her whole life and relies on captioning for television, movies, and live events. So I'm now going to turn it over to Lindsay. And Lindsay, could you make sure to do a visual description of yourself before you begin?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's so great to be here. A video description of myself is that I'm a white woman with long brown hair, and I have brown eyes, and I'm wearing a red bandana, and I'm in my living room where you might see my dogs popping in and out. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So right after I was born, I had a staph infection and almost died. The doctors gave me antibiotics, which saved my life. Yay! But they also destroyed my hearing. So I've been deaf for as long as I can remember. I rely on lip reading for face-to-face communication in casual settings. So like the school, theater, and events was crucial for getting all the information. Lip reading is not good enough. So I need captioning or key speech transliteration. I'm not going to get into key speech today, but it's basically a form of visual communication for deaf people, much like sign language. So most people have never heard of it, so I'll post the link later in case anyone's curious. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my history with captioning. So I always joke that it's such a great time to be deaf because accessibility just keeps getting better and better over the years. When I was about 6 years old, we got a captioning box for a TV. Nowadays, captioning is built into all the TVs, but back then it was like a separate device, like a cable box. So we plugged it in, and then the words magically appeared on the screen. And it was so exciting. And I was finally able to understand what was happening in those Saturday morning cartoons. And then fast forward to the early 2000s, I was in college and the school provided me with a real-time captioner for some of my classes. And sorry, is that my dog? And so she would type, and then the words would show up on my laptop. Kind of like the captioning that you see here today. And before that, in elementary, junior high, high school, I had the key speech translating for all of my classes, which was awesome, but was very new and exciting to see captioning in a school setting. I really liked it because it allowed me to try to read the teacher's lips as much as I possibly could. And then if he turned around or mumbled or was doing in the back of the class and asked questions, I could always refer to the text on the screen to catch anything I might have missed. So that was cool. And then around that time, movie theaters starting to offer captioned movies. Granted, it was usually like a children's movie at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, which was super convenient, but I loved it. It was so nice to be in a movie theater eating $10 popcorn and just able to understand everything that was happening in the movie without, poking my friends saying, what did they say, what's going on? And now they have captioning on demand. So they have these devices that need to stick into a cup holder with the gooseneck and a screen that has all the captioning on it. It's great. So now I can go see a movie anytime I want to. I mean, when it's not the pandemic, of course. And then came captioning in theater. So growing up, my family would try to take me to dinner, and I would almost always fall asleep. I fall asleep during Cats. I fall asleep during the Christmas Carol. Finally, they just gave up, and I decided dinner's not for me. And then, in like 10 years ago, Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago started offering captions for some of the live performances. And I was like, what? These people care about accommodating me, like they're spending money to make people like me feel included. This is incredible. So yeah, so first was TV, school, movies, the theater, and now it's captioning for live streamed events. So when the pandemic started, I gotta be honest, I was freaking out. It was like all the progress that we made was going backwards. Everybody was wearing a mask. I couldn't read lips anymore. I'm going to the store, constantly being worried that someone's like, get out of my way, or something like that. And then movie theaters closed, theaters closed. We all had to work from home. The only way to spend time with people was online. And reading lips on a screen is so much harder than in real life. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, it's because the screen is two-dimensional, and it's just, and not to mention, bad video, where it's blurry, or it's jumping, cutting in and out. And then meanwhile, everyone's scrambling to figure out how to move forward. How do we bring movies back? How do we bring theater back? How do we work? How do we live, And then, and this is really like a Wild West time for accessibility, because no one really knew what to do. We had been so accustomed to doing things in person. Some people all forced to just figure things out. Then a part of me was like, oh my gosh, just when it was starting to feel easy, but people are figuring out. And, as time has gone on, technology is getting better and better. I mean, like for example, Zoom started offering auto captioning back in December. And while auto captioning is not ideal, for, actual events, it's great for talking to your mother-in-law, things like that. So I thought having that as an option. And so over the last year, I've obviously, like everyone else, been to more live streamed events than I ever have in my life. And most of them, virtually, have been accessible. I mean, that's mostly because I would seek out accessible events, make sure that was captioned, so it's really important to make that information clear when you're advertising an event. Because a lot of people would just assume that it's not accessible and not go. So most of my experiences have been awesome. There was one bad experience. I'm not going to name names, but this was a major social media manager company. So I run a social media account for my work, and I wanted to manage the social media, schedule tweets and posts. And so this company was having a free trial. And in the free trial included 4 half-hour training sessions, like how to craft the perfect tweet and things like that. So I'm like, oh, free, awesome. If this is a big company, I'm sure it's accessible. So I'm, on the website trying to find information, and there's no information about accessibility whatsoever. I'm like, well, okay, I'll just contact them. So I try to find an email address to contact, and then I'll put that. I could feel the heat going on. I know it's very loud. So I couldn't find an email address. And so I went on Facebook Messenger to contact them. And I was like, so hey, I'm really excited about these classes. Can you tell me if they're captioned? Or if they're not captioned, would it be possible then you can send me the video a few days later? And they were basically like, no, we cannot do that. We will send this information to our team for future. And I'm just like a total BS response. And I was kind of shocked, because like I said, this is like a $1 million company. And it's been so spoiled by many organizations who have way smaller budgets. So it's like, okay, maybe this is done now. So I tried to explain a little bit about the ADA. And I even sent them a link to rev.com, which I think Christina mentioned, and they will caption videos for you for like $1.50 a minute. It's very affordable and very easy. But they were like, oh wow, sorry. So that definitely sucked. I mean, I don't expect to get accommodations every time I ask, but I at least expect people to pretend to care. But the cool thing about live streaming in the pandemic is that so many possibilities have opened up. For example, in January, we had the inauguration, and it was more accessible than it has ever been. I mean, usually televised events like that will have one screen with captioning and maybe a box with an ESL interpreter. But with live streaming, you could have as many screens as you want. So for the inauguration, they sent out links for people who need an audio description, for people who need an ASL, for people who need a tuned speech. I had never seen that on TV in my life. And that was really cool. Yeah, and I don't think it would have happened without the pandemic, at least not this quickly, so cool things are happening and I'm excited about all the possibilities. In general, I'm constantly blown away by how many people care about accessibility. Because growing up as a person with a disability, you can't help but feel like an inconvenience. I know I shouldn't feel that way, but it's hard. It's hard when you go to the movie theater, for example, and you say, hey, the caption's not working, and the base just go, I have to go upstairs, fix this, it's like, oh, I'm sorry. So it just means so much when people care about making everybody feel included. It matters. So when you do that, it matters. It matters to a lot of people. It matters to me. So I think my time's almost up. So thanks for letting me ramble. I'll pass this over back to Christina.
Hey, Lindsay, you are not rambling whatsoever.
Thank you.
Yeah, not at all. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing. I wondered, Lindsay, if you had any suggestions for people just getting started with being accessible, kind of what suggestions you have, because I know you know a lot about getting started with providing accessibility.
Well, I can really mostly just speak to captioning, but I think, well, to start out, just make sure that, because I know it's an investment of money, but I think aiming for at least having videos be captioned is huge. And don't freak out about being perfect, like we're all in this together and we all know that it's a learning process. And I do highly recommend love.com, which is, I write this in the chat. Once I find it, where's the chat? I'll figure it out later. So it's RED.com, and they're great. They have like a 2-day turnaround. So you can send them a video, they'll capture the whole thing and send it back to you. Another thing I would recommend is just trying to make the process easy. Like I find a lot of times websites will not have an email address that's easy to find. So I don't know how to contact you, or so it's just like making easy. Yeah, that's one of my biggest suggestion.
That's super helpful. Thanks, Lindsay. And it's so good to see you, even if it is through the screen. So we now have time to turn it over to you, our audience members, to see what questions you have for either me or for Lindsay. I think one thing that would be helpful, Clover, if you could pop on, I know this came up in the chat a few times about how you were able to solve for the interpreter. And I know that was an issue. So could you tell everybody how you fixed it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. That was fantastic, and I really appreciate everything that you shared, Christina and Lindsay. Actually, the interpreters helped me quite a bit figure out how to make this right. So I am not sure which version of Zoom I am on, just to put that out there. Somebody had asked me that question and I can look that up later, but I had to spotlight the interpreters in addition to Christina, and now Lindsay is also spotlit. And I had to turn the participant, there's a host of options under participants. I had to put it under host view, and then I had to change the view to gallery view. And I think that that is what helped while you were doing the presentation, Christina. I don't have that on right now, but I think that everybody can be seen. I hope so.
Awesome. Thanks, Clover. And this is for the webinar setting in Zoom. So for the meeting setting, it is a little bit different, but spotlighting is really helpful. And I think also we made sure at the top that you knew we were providing the services. So there's, first of all, a way that people even know what's happening. And then we were able to troubleshoot during the event, because there's always things that are going to go wrong, as I keep saying, but we know that is true with technology. So I think also being prepared to figure it out and troubleshoot in the moment. And then, like I said, if you're doing a big event, that's when it's super helpful to do a dress rehearsal or have everybody come on early. So that includes the speakers, but also the access providers, so you can make sure everything's working and it makes sense to you. So if you're worried about doing it for the first time, it's a great way to assuage your fears. So we're starting to have some questions in the Q&A, which is great. So there's a great question for you, Lindsay, from Craig, who's saying, Lindsay, could you speak on your experience with music? Ooh, this is a good one for you. And how we can make music more accessible.
Yeah, so in one of life's great ironies, I married a musician. And so he's in a band called Jump Little Children. There's a comma after the jump, which is very important. And after we started dating, he got more and more involved in captioning. And long story short, he started to caption some of their musical performances. And I highly recommend doing that. That's the kind of thing you can do ahead of time, just like make a PowerPoint on a black screen with yellow text, just all the words to the songs, like maybe 2 lines at a time, projecting or putting on a TV. It was so cool. And that, I mean, just knowing what they were saying and being able to sing along with the rest of the crowd was really cool. And yeah, so that's, I mean, I hope that's an exciting answer because that's all I thought.
It's a good one. And somebody else has another question about music. I've noticed that auto captions translate our virtual videos, which include music with lyrics, just as music. I'm assuming a service like Rev would insert the lyrics appropriately.
I think it's actually the other way around. Like Kathy is our captioner today. She's awesome. And she will always include the lyrics to music. But on TV and movies a lot of the time, so just say music, you know, like maybe one musical note. And I'm like, I want to know the words to the song. Even if it doesn't matter, I want to know. So I think auto captioning may try. I don't know. Actually, I've never watched auto captions during music before. That's interesting. Is that what happened?
I would think if it's easy to hear the lyric that it probably would do it. And if it was kind of hard or distorted, that maybe it wouldn't pick up on it, but I don't know. I've not tried that either.
Yeah.
But that is a good point for that Sarah made, who asked the question, that when you do have music, even if it's classical music or music without lyrics, to help explain the mood, because that we know that music sets a really powerful mood for us as viewers. So we want to make sure that everybody's getting that experience.
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. You know, especially, you know, like I'm seeing a play. So my husband and I actually got into the captioning business for a while, and we were captioning, you know, plays in town, mostly for smaller theaters. And I always tell them, can you just describe the music? Is it tense, moody, cheerful, you know? Because that helps, you know, like when you watch a scary movie and the killer is about to come, and it's like creepy little music, and that helps you know that something scary is about to happen. So, yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you. I'm like looking to see what else. So somebody asks, are there any video-based platforms that you all look to as great examples of accessibility in addition to CCAC? Do you have any that come to mind for you, Lindsay?
Video-based platforms, you mean like streaming services like Netflix and Hulu?
Well, I think maybe more so the way that I'm understanding this question would be more so just like an example like I shared of CCACs where we're trying to be a model of accessibility. Are there other examples of other organizations that might have good videos? That's how I'm reading the question.
Yes, actually, the organization I work for is called ADA 25 Advancing Leadership. And we had several events last year featuring Stacey Abrams and my mind's blanking, tons of amazing people. And they were all accessible. So I highly recommend them as an example.
Yeah, that would be a great one. And then somebody else has a question. How early do you suggest booking an ASL interpreter for an event? That's a good question. I would say you can do it like as soon as you know you're going to want to have an interpreter for the event. So it could be even like a year in advance, potentially. You definitely would want to check in again a little closer to the date and make sure you're still on the schedule. And, you know, sometimes doing things too far in advance, you want to make sure everyone still remembers, but you can definitely do it as early as you think of it. And definitely want to try to do it at least with 2 weeks notice, because it does sometimes take some time to get some people in place. You can find somebody even the day of if you need it, but obviously don't want to rely on that, and you don't need that stress if you're planning an event. So don't stress yourself out if you could avoid it. All right. Somebody asks, Christina, could you talk about working with groups of teaching artists who each have different online experiences and unique lesson plans? Do you have recommendations for organizations wanting to start this work with their faculty? So I'm very new to working at Adler University. So I've worked there for like 6 weeks. So I'm working on this literally right now. And I don't know if I have a lot of advice for right now, because I'm still so new, but I would say doing some sort of training with your teaching artists, first of all, sort of a version of disability awareness, and helping people think about what disability means and how many people have disabilities, and then offering some practical tips. So kind of having that baseline, like what is disability, and then having some practical tips of what this might look like for you if you're teaching. If you do have a couple of teachers that you think exemplify this, having them do some peer teaching. So having them demonstrate and model some of the ways that they've been able to be accessible is really helpful. I think it also letting teachers know sort of that you're there to help support them if there are issues that come up, because sometimes I think teachers feel kind of alone when there might be some issues with a student. So trying to have some sort of support system in place. So I would say training is the big one, and also identifying who your really strong teachers are that are really good already at doing that. And there are usually 1 or 2 within your organization. And if you're specifically talking about teaching artists, and artists themselves, I think art therapists usually are good examples of people that are usually really good at working with different types of audiences. So they might have some helpful strategies for what you are talking about. The next question is, what are key indicators that one should hire a professional captioner versus captioning themselves? Lindsay, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. I think the biggest indicator is how much time do you have? Because it is extremely time consuming. I mean, I have met so many people who said, oh, I can do this myself, and then 15 hours being at the like, oh my gosh, it takes so long. But if you have the time, like Christina said, if you have an intern or someone. Now I'm talking about videos. So now I'm not talking about live captioning, because you can't do that without going to school for years and years and years. So yeah.
Yeah. So for posted videos where you want to update the captions, I think it is relatively easy to update some of those. If they're super, super long, then no. But if you have some short videos that you already have like the automatic captions with YouTube on, it's usually pretty easy to correct some of the errors that way. I think it depends on how much time you have, like Lindsay's saying, how much money you have. If you have the means to pay for rev.com to do it, then great, they can do it. I know probably most of you don't. So in that case, I would say to make it an effort to look at your backlog of videos and see what you need to start captioning, and maybe delegate to different interns or different volunteers to work on. But then also really making a concerted effort, like here's the line in the sand. From here going forward, every video we post is going to be captioned, and then work on the backlog too. But it gets kind of out of control if you're like, I got to do the past ones and we keep making and churning out more content. It gets out of control. So definitely be like, from here on out, we're not posting a video that's not captioned, and then looking back would be helpful. And even at CCAC, we struggle with that too, because we wanted to do it in-house and ended up having to hire somebody. So are there any other questions that folks have? Oh, and somebody asked the question in the chat. It's the same one. Oh, and wait, we got something else. So the same question, but also saying, not just captioning yourselves, but also audio description, other access services, if you have a team of willing staff and volunteers. I think it kind of depends on the situation, and I would actually suggest reaching out with me or with someone from CCAC, maybe separately, to see if to see if it makes sense for how many people you have and what you have going on. If it's for past videos and they're not that long, it's probably pretty manageable for you to do it yourself. But I think it depends on your time and your experience too in doing it. So I think that would be worth having another conversation, but there certainly are ways that you can be more accessible. And like we keep saying, accessibility is a journey, not a destination. So we're not going to say, great, we're accessible now. We're going to keep trying and trying to be more and more accessible. So maybe your first couple of videos, you're going to have, if it's a talk like this, you're going to have the presenter describe their slides, and you're going to make sure that you have, if you have a title slide, that you have an audio that goes along with it, and call it good. That's probably fine. But I think it kind of depends on the context there. So let's have a further conversation. A lot of this depends on the context. Are there any other questions? Lindsay, did you have anything else that you wanted to chime in?
I think we might have lost Lindsay.
Oh, she got kicked out, she said. Oh dear.
What?
I'm back. She's back. She doesn't have her option to show video.
All right, I fixed that. She should be on in a second.
Thanks, Clover.
There she is.
Lindsay, hey.
Hi.
I wondered if we don't have any more questions. We have about 9 minutes. We can end early, but if there was anything else you wanted to chime in with.
What did I miss the last 2 minutes that you discussed, Christina?
Well, we were just kind of talking about, if you should do it yourself versus hire someone. And I think it depends on the context, has been my answer, where there are some things you can do yourself. And then there's some times when you're going to have to hire a professional when like Lindsay, you did the action of like putting your hands in your hair, like, this is taking so much time. That can happen too. And so we know we're already doing that as nonprofit administrators anyway. So we don't want you to pull out your hair. So I think that would be a good thing to ask somebody to see. So
yeah, I would agree. But I feel bad about doing this because I already discourage anyone from trying, I was mostly talking about 2-hour videos, that takes a long time. So like Christina said, 10-minute video, you can absolutely do it. It's not that hard.
Yep. So it depends.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we hope that this helps inspire you to get started, to just start doing something. You don't have to wait for a big initiative to get started. We're all here to support you. Lindsay certainly also, I know, is open for questions and for feedback too. We're all here to help. So please reach out with questions and support, because this is hard work and it only is easy when we do it together. So thank you all for your time. Thanks to the Donnelly Foundation and Lindsay and all of our awesome service providers. Thank you all and have a great Monday.